Welcome to this webinar on Key Action 2 Strategic Partnerships in the field of adult education and vocational education training. This is a pre-recorded webinar. My name is Anam and I work within the Erasmus Plus team at Ecoris UK. This webinar is aimed at applicants looking to apply for a Key Action 2 strategic partnership in either the field of adult education or vocational educational training. The webinar will primarily focus on how to complete the application form, as well as providing you with some hints and tips to help you with the application process. Please note, this webinar is a joint webinar for adult education and VET, as the application form and overall process are very similar for both. However, when applying, you must carefully choose which field is most relevant to your project and ensure that you complete and submit the correct application form for the relevant field, as these are separate. The priorities of the action are also different depending on which field you apply under, so it is very important to ensure you apply under the field that is most relevant and most likely to be impacted by your project. For the purpose of this webinar, we will be using the Key Action 2 Adult Education Application Form for illustrative purposes. The KA2 VET application is a separate form but works in the same way. So, just to give you an overview of what I will be covering in today's webinar, I'll start by providing you with a quick introduction to Key Action 2 strategic partnerships, what funding is available, and some of the changes in the 2018 call. The main focus of the session will be on the completion of the KA2 application form, also known as the application e-form. First, I'll talk you through some of the steps you need to take before you begin completing the application form, and then we will go through the form together, completing certain parts, validating the form, and showing you how to utilize the distance calculator. Finally, after rounding up some key points, we will run through the next steps following the submission of your application and remind you how to contact the UK National Agency for additional support in the run-up to the deadline. Within this webinar, I will be referring to the Erasmus Plus Programme Guide. In all instances, the Programme Guide I will be referring to is version 2 of the 2018 core PDF version, available on the Erasmus Plus website, so please bear this in mind where there is reference to page numbers. Before we begin, I would like to briefly mention the latest update with regards to the Erasmus Plus programme and Brexit. The UK government has stated that, subject to successful negotiations, the UK will continue to benefit from Erasmus Plus until the end of the current programme in 2020. UK organisations wishing to apply for funding in 2018 should prepare for participation as usual ahead of the 2018 application deadlines. The latest updates are available on the Erasmus Plus Brexit webpage at the address shown on the slide. As you know, in this session we are focusing on Key Action 2 strategic partnerships. Key Action 2 is all about cooperation and collaboration. It offers opportunities for organisations from different countries and different sectors to work together to share good practice and develop innovation in order to improve provision for learners. The UK National Agency, which is a partnership between the British Council and Ecoris UK, is responsible for managing strategic partnership projects, the decentralised action under Key Action 2. Strategic partnerships in the field of adult education and VET are managed by the team at Ecoris UK. Other types of projects under Key Action 2, such as knowledge and sector skills alliances, are managed centrally by the Executive Agency of the European Commission. We won't be talking about these types of projects during the webinar today, but you can find more information in Part B of the Programme Guide from page 128 onwards. Strategic partnerships are cooperation projects which allow organisations to work together to improve the quality of education and training provision, tackle common issues, and share or develop innovative practice. One organisation applies for funding on behalf of the whole partnership and, if the project is approved, this partner takes on the role of coordinator and has overall responsibility for managing the funding and reporting to the national agency. Strategic partnerships are flexible in terms of size and in terms of the objectives and activities they deliver. Projects can be of the following two types. Firstly, strategic partnerships supporting innovation. These projects are expected to develop innovative outputs and/or undertake intensive dissemination and exploitation activities. Strategic partnerships supporting innovation can request specific funding for intellectual outputs and multiplier events in order to support the delivery of their objectives. Secondly, strategic partnerships supporting exchange of good practices. The main objective of these projects is to allow organizations to develop and reinforce networks, increase their capacity to operate at a transnational level, and exchange ideas, practices, and methods. Depending on their objectives, projects may also develop tangible outputs and are still expected to disseminate the results of their activities in a way that is proportionate to the aims and scope of the project. These results and activities will be co-financed through the standard project management and implementation budget, and no separate funding will be available to develop intellectual outputs or multiplier events. The type of strategic partnership to be developed will need to be selected within the application form. It is therefore important to give careful consideration to the type of project that is best suited to your objectives and the experience and capacity of your partnership. Also, when preparing your project and choosing partners, it is important to carefully consider the experience and capacity of the participating organizations. Whilst large-scale projects are supported, it is also possible to deliver smaller-scale cooperation projects. The grant will vary depending on the size and scale of the project, and I will talk more about this when we look at the budget section of the application form. Strategic partnerships can address field-specific priorities relevant to the field the application is submitted under, for example, vet or adult education, and/or horizontal priorities. The partnership can be made up of organizations working directly in the field the application is submitted under, or in other fields of education, training, or youth. However, in all cases, the priorities addressed by the project and the composition of the partnership must be shown to be relevant to the field the application is being submitted under. Projects focusing on adult education can deliver a wide range of activities around topics such as developing, testing, adapting, and implementing innovative approaches in learning and teaching methodologies for adult learners, for example, focusing on delivering key competencies, basic skills, language skills, and focus on the use of IT. They can also promote recognition and certification of skills and competencies by referencing them to European and national qualification frameworks and using EU instruments. They can develop tools or approaches to improve the accessibility of learning opportunities for adults, by example, development of training courses available for adult education teachers, managers, or other adult education staff, or by promoting the development of multi-purpose learning centres and regional networks of learning providers. Or they can focus on providing flexible pathways for adult learners, including validation of their prior learning by practical application and testing of methods for valuing knowledge and competencies acquired through informal and non-formal learning. The examples provided on this slide are just some of the ideas. You should refer to the examples provided in the program guide. Refer to Part B of the Erasmus Plus program guide, page 106, and Annex 1 from the page 289 for further examples. Always ensure that your project idea fits with the action priorities relevant to the field you are applying under. Where relevant, when devising your project activities, you may find it useful to consult the website of the Electronic Platform for Adult Learning in Europe. eParley is a multilingual open membership online community for anyone with a professional role in adult learning across Europe. It is set up around the sharing of content related to adult learning, including news, blog posts, resources, and events and courses. Projects focusing on vocational education and training can deliver a wide range of activities around topics such as, for example, developing institutional partnerships supporting the setup and implementation of an internationalization strategy of vet learners and apprentices, developing partnerships aimed at promoting work-based learning, for example, developing new training content, integrating periods of work-based learning, working together to increase the quality of vet provision and adapt vet provision based on outcomes. Again, for more information, refer to Part B of the Erasmus Plus program guide, page 106, and Annex 1 from page 290 for further examples. Again, always ensure that your project idea fits with the action priorities relevant to the field you are applying under. It is important to be aware of the program objectives and the Key Action 2 action priorities when developing your project. Information about the program objectives can be found in Part A of the Erasmus Plus program guide, and you can see an overview on the slide. Firstly, recognition and validation of skills and qualifications, for example by using Europass or ECVET to validate the learning outcomes from your project. Secondly, dissemination and exploitation of project results in a very important objective. You can refer to Annex 2 of the program guide for useful guidance on this. All Key Action 2 projects are required to upload final project results onto the Erasmus Plus project results platform by the end of the project. You should also be aware of the open access requirements of the program. Educational tools or materials produced with Erasmus Plus funding must be made freely available online in a digital format under an open license. Such materials are known as open educational resources. Another important feature, of course, is the international dimension, i.e. cooperation with organisations from different countries and making results available in different languages to maximise impact. Equity and inclusion is also an important objective, for example, facilitating participation, where relevant and appropriate, of learners with fewer opportunities. Lastly, the protection and safety of participants must always be a priority under Erasmus Plus projects. This includes making suitable plans within your project to ensure that all participants are safe and supported. In addition to the program objectives, in order to be funded, all strategic partnerships must address either at least one horizontal action priority for strategic partnerships, see pages 106 to 107 in the program guide, and or at least one field-specific priority relevant to the field the application is being submitted under. VET or adult education, please see page 109 of the program guide. If you select a horizontal priority, it is still important to show how the chosen priority is relevant to the field you are applying under and how your project will deliver impacts in the chosen field. In the 2018 call, there have been some changes which it is important to be aware of. Firstly, there have been some changes to the Key Action 2 action priorities, both horizontal and field-specific, so it is very important to refer to the current ones. Also, there have been some small changes to the award criteria. As regards to the budget, there is a new budget category for learning, teaching and training activities called Exceptional Costs for Expensive Travel Costs. This allows additional costs to be claimed for unusually expensive travel costs for participants in learning, teaching and training activities where it can be shown that the standard travel unit costs will not cover at least 70% of the travel costs. This must be fully justified in the application. In addition, there have been some minor changes to some of the unit costs for teaching, training and learning activities. So, how does a Key Action 2 strategic partnership work? One organisation applies to their country's national agency, i.e. the UK, on behalf of the entire partnership. Projects can be of different sizes, but you must have a minimum of 3 partners from 3 different programme countries, including the applicant. The lead or applicant organisation must always be from a programme country, though partner countries can participate as partners if their participation brings clear added value to the project. Projects can last between 12 and 36 months. You need to choose the duration of the project at the application stage, and this cannot be changed. You should ensure the duration is realistic. Projects can be different sizes, and the funding will reflect this. You need to build your project budget from a series of budget items based on the planned objectives, activities, and outputs. The maximum possible budget is equivalent to €12,500 per month for the duration of the project. However, not every project will receive the maximum available budget. There is no formal requirement for match funding. However, the principle of co-financing applies. Please see page 250 of the program guide for more information. This means that the grant is a contribution to the cost of delivering the project and may not cover all costs. Before completing your application, you will need to have a Participant Identification Code (PIC). Your partners will also need to have a PIC. The first step is to check if your organization or partner already has a PIC. If not, you will need to follow the two-step process below. Firstly, you will need to register on EU Login, formerly known as ECAS. You need to register on EU Login to use any external European Commission tool. If you are already registered on EU Login, you can just use your existing login details. Otherwise, we have a video guide on our website which will talk you through how to register. The second step is to obtain a Participant Identification Code (PIC) via the Participant Portal. The Participant Portal is a single entry point for the electronic administration of EU-funded projects related to Erasmus+. You will be prompted to provide information about your organization as well as upload documents related to your organization. These documents are needed to prove the legal status and financial capacity of your organization, and it is essential that the information on these documents matches the information on the portal. If your organization already has a PIC, you do not need to register for another one. Use the existing PIC, but ensure that all the information about your organization on the participant portal is correct and up to date. As well as ensuring they have a PIC, all partners are also required to submit signed partner mandates with the application. You can download the partner mandate templates from our website. You will need to ensure that the information, such as the name of the organization, address, and legal representative on the mandate, is identical to the information in the application form, otherwise the partner mandate will not be accepted. After developing your project idea and completing the PIC registration process, you can move on to completing the application form. As this is as well as this recorded webinar, please ensure you refer to the 2018 Guide for Applicants available on the How to Apply pages of the Erasmus Plus website. This guidance is provided by the UK National Agency to help you complete and submit your application. As you complete your application, you should also refer to the quality award criteria against which your application will be assessed. The award criteria are outlined in the 2018 Programme Guide and Guide for Experts, and are also mentioned in the guides for applicants. You should design your project with these award criteria in mind. All these documents can be downloaded from our website. The application form is an e-form and must be submitted online by the applicant organisation by the deadline of 11 a.m. UK time, 21st of March 2018. You will need to use your PIC and your partner's PICs to fill out the application. It is therefore important that the PIC information is correct and up to date for all partners. To make sure you have the correct application form in front of you, you should double check that it states Call 2018, Round 1, Deadline 21st of March 2018. Applications submitted to the UK National Agency should be completed in English. Please refer to the 2018 Guide for Applicants and the European Commission's technical guidance for detailed information on the functionality and compatibility of the e-form. It is important to note that the KA2 e-forms are not compatible with the Adobe version 15.8. The recommended version of Adobe is Acrobat Reader DC version 15.20. The e-form is compatible with some earlier versions, but you should refer to the guides for applicants and the 2018 KA2 technical guidance for further information. Where necessary, you can download the appropriate Adobe version online. We will now go into the actual application form and run it through with you. As we go along, we will also show you how to fill in some of the sections, as well as give you some hints and tips based on feedback from previous rounds. We will be using a dummy application form for illustrative purposes. Both the adult education and vet application forms work in exactly the same way. Before I go on to the application form, I will just need to have a second to have some water, and then I will come back. This application form, which is an e-form, is available to download from the Apply for Vocational Education and Training or Adult Education Partnership Funding page of the Erasmus Plus website, depending on which field you wish to apply for. Ensure you download the application form and save it as a PDF to your computer. Check that you have downloaded the correct application for the field you wish to apply for, either VET or Adult Education. As mentioned on the slide, you can do this by checking the following details on the first page of the application form. The core year is 2018. The application e-form is for either KA2 Adult Education or VET partnerships. I will now move on to section B, Context. As I go through the application form, I will use the scroll bar to scroll up and down the page to the relevant sections of the form. I will concentrate on hints and tips for each section of the form as we go through the sections, rather than describing all the information needed. And I will then concentrate on the sections dealing with project activities and budget, showing how these link to each other, as well as giving you hints and tips on how to complete them. Another important feature of the KA2 application form is that you need to choose what the main objective of your project is. Based on this choice, certain sections in the application form will either appear or disappear, as you will be able to see now. I will click on the drop-down menu for the main objective of the project, which you can see on screen now. The two options are innovation or exchange of good practices. I will select innovation for illustrative purposes. We will start off by showing you what the e-form looks like for an innovation project, and then show you the differences with exchange of practices. You should choose the project format which is most appropriate for delivering the planned project objectives and results. This should be discussed with partners during the initial planning stages, taking into consideration the proposed objectives and activities of the project, and the size, capacity, and experience of the partnership. Although not a requirement, applicants or partnerships with less organizational capacity and/or less experience of European partnership working may wish to consider applying for a strategic partnership, supporting the exchange of good practices as a first step. These projects allow organizations to gain experience of transnational cooperation and to deliver joint outcomes and results without the requirement to deliver substantial, high-quality, innovative intellectual outputs. You will also need to select the language you are using to complete the application form from the drop-down menu. For the applications made to the UKNA, this should always be English. Section B.1 requires you to detail the title of your project, and there is also the opportunity to type in a project acronym if you have one. Following this, you will need to input your start date and choose the duration of your project. This will automatically fill in the end date for you. The start date must be between the 1st of September and the 31st of December 2018. Please note that the latest possible end date for your project is the 31st of August 2021. Section B.2 requires you to input the national agency of the applicant organisation. For the UK, this would be UK01, United Kingdom. I will now scroll down to section C, Priorities. Here you will have to select the most relevant horizontal or sectoral priority for your project. I will open the drop-down menu and select one of the horizontal priorities. As you can see, your main priority should be either a horizontal priority or a field-specific priority for the field you are applying under, VET or adult education. If your application aims to address one of the horizontal priorities, you still need to clearly demonstrate how the project will be relevant to and will impact your chosen field. I'll now click on the plus sign. You can select up to 2 more priorities here. You can also select other fields in case your application has a cross-sectoral approach. I will open the drop-down menu and I will scroll down and select an example. Please ensure that you apply and address priorities which are relevant to your selected field. Also bear in mind that projects addressing inclusive education and training, social inclusion, as one of their horizontal priority will be considered highly relevant. However, you need to make sure that this is really addressed within your application and not simply selected from the drop-down menu. Moving on to section D. Section D.1 is for your organization as applicant. Sections D.2 onwards are for any partner organizations that will be included in your project. Remember, when you put in your PIC and your partner's PIC numbers, the information will automatically populate from the information from the participant portal. I will now click the Check PIC button for the applicant organization. Check the details carefully, and if you notice any details are incorrect for you or your partner, they will need to be corrected in the portal. You should also check that the information in the partner mandates matches the information in this section for you and your partner's organization details. If any of the information in the mandate doesn't match the application form, you'll need to go back to your partner to amend the mandate. Please note that all participating organizations need to be identified in the application form, and you won't be able to add partners at a later stage. The inclusion of partners from a partner country will need to be well justified, particularly in terms of how they will bring an essential added value to the project. If this condition is not met, the project will not be considered for selection. It is also important to remember that a better quality application will be specific and name staff members who will be involved in delivering the project and their skills. Please explain how your organization's previous experience of delivering projects or activities has built the skills and knowledge needed for the activities you propose in the application. Include details of the people your organization typically works with in terms of geographic location and any additional needs they might have if you feel that this information is relevant. In addition, clarify how the activities proposed in the application fit with other programs or activities you deliver. This will help the assessors understand how the proposal is innovative or complementary to other initiatives that your organization is already involved in. Please make sure it is clear from the description of each partner's work and expertise why they have been chosen to participate in your project. This applies to all partners, including less experienced organizations which may be involved, and partners from other fields of education, training, or youth. It is very important to choose appropriate partners. When looking for potential partners, you can seek recommendations from trusted partners or exploit known links and networks. You can also search for complementary organizations with experience of Erasmus Plus and its predecessor programs via the Erasmus Plus project results platform, or use the partner finding tool on the Ipale platform. You may also want to consider including partners with a mix of experience of European cooperation in your project, including where appropriate organizations that are new to Erasmus Plus and/or European partnership working and will therefore gain particular benefit from their involvement. Within the application, you will need to provide a clear rationale for selecting your partners. Partners' experience and knowledge should contribute towards achievement of the project objectives. If you include partners from other fields, you will need to provide a clear rationale in terms of how they will add value to a vet or adult education project, depending on the field you are applying under. If you are submitting a supporting innovation project, this section of the application will have an additional box focus on associated partners. If you are submitting an exchange of practices project, please make sure that you mention any associated partners and justify how their involvement will add value to the project within the description of the project section. Please note that it is not a requirement to include associated partners, and they should only be included if they have something relevant to contribute towards the project. Associated partners will not receive any grant funding. Further information on how to choose appropriate partners can be found in the Guides for Applicants, Section 3. Each page of the application has a Validate button, so you can check information as you go. As you can see now, I'm clicking on the Validate icon. This will identify if any mandatory sections have been missed so far and any errors in the way the information has been input. You can see the form directs us to the error or box where there is information which is wrong or missing. In this case, the email address is not in the correct format, and therefore I will now type gmail@gmail.com to the end of the email address after test in order to correct the error that has appeared. After you have completed your details as an applicant organisation, please carry on with the completion of details of your partners with the rest of the Section D. I will now move on to Section E of the application form, the description of the project, hints and tips. As well as a description of the project, your application will be of a higher quality if you explain the rationale behind the project and if you can demonstrate that your project is based on a genuine needs analysis relevant to the project. You must also ensure you make it clear how your project will address at least one horizontal or one field-specific action priority relevant to the field you are submitting under. If this is not clear, your application may not be funded. Make sure you demonstrate that each transnational face-to-face partner meeting is necessary for achieving the results of the project. Make sure that the number of partner meetings is appropriate, as assessors consider that hosting more than one partner meeting each could be excessive unless well justified. Show that the planned participants are appropriate to the project activities, as this will support your request for budget under the Transnational Project Meetings heading. Make sure your results fit with the objectives of the project and that they are realistic and achievable. You should provide details of which partners will be involved in producing each result and when they will become available. Make sure you know what it is meant by results. Please go to page 308 of the Programme Guide for the Commission's definition. Make sure that you explain how partners you selected will contribute towards achievement of the project's objectives. If you selected Exchange of Practices project, here you should explain how associated partners, if involved in the project, will contribute to the project delivery or support the dissemination and sustainability of your project. If your project is support of innovation, as already mentioned earlier, you will need to provide this explanation in a separate box under Section D. If you are unsure about strategic partnerships, what they can do, or the priorities of the action, please refer to the Programme Guide, Part B, and the examples of project formats provided from page 289 onwards. Moving on to Section E.1, Participants. A key point to check in this section is the definition of participants with fewer opportunities on your handout to make sure you are aware of what this covers. You will need to specify how many participants with fewer opportunities are going to be involved, what are the situations they are facing from. You will need to select the situation from the drop-down menu and how you will, as a partnership, support them in order to achieve planned activities. Moving down to Section F. Here you should mention any preparatory activities that will take place before the start of your project, including practical arrangements prior to the submission of your application. However, please note that the allocated funding cannot cover any costs incurred before the start date of your project. Scrolling down to Section G. In this section, give as much detail as you can. For example, when describing your monitoring activities, mention how you will coordinate activities within the partnership and how you will identify and resolve any risks within your project. The best quality projects will use qualitative and quantitative indicators of achievement in order to assess whether and to what extent the project has achieved its objectives and results, which helps to demonstrate the impact of your project. Where possible, list the indicators and attach numerical targets to quantitative indicators and explain who will analyze these. Some examples of indicators could include measures of skill levels attained to establish the impact of new methods on participants and measures of the quality of the results produced. Methods to measure achievement may include surveys, web analytics, and interviews. Please be aware that depending on which type of the project you are applying for, either innovation or exchange of practices, additional questions will appear within this section. Make sure you provide clear answers and provide all the relevant information under each question. I will cover the project management and implementation heading in more detail a little later on, as there are aspects which feed into the budget section. It is very important to bear in mind that the data here will need to correspond to the data in the budget section. Otherwise, you will not be able to validate or submit the e-form. I'll now scroll down to section G.1. As we have selected innovation in section B, section G.1 intellectual outputs will appear here. Intellectual outputs are substantial, high-quality, tangible outcomes with potential for wider dissemination, exploitation, and impact. Each intellectual output should be a standalone result, not a stage in the development of a result. Some examples of intellectual outputs could be curricular, pedagog, pedagog, pedagogical materials, open educational resources, or IT tools. Internal project management tools such as dissemination plans or project evaluation reports are not considered as intellectual outputs as they do not meet the definition. Equally, a standard project website would not be considered an intellectual output and would need to be co-financed using the project management and implementation budget. Under innovation projects, we would normally expect you to develop intellectual outputs. Therefore, you would select Yes from the drop-down menu to generate the relevant parts of the application you will need to complete. Here I've selected Yes. You must ensure that any intellectual outputs listed meet the eligibility criteria and clearly explain the resources that you will need to produce the planned intellectual outputs, as this will be essential to justify your budget request. If you are not planning to develop any intellectual outputs as part of your project, you should consider whether it would be more appropriate to select exchange of practices as the main objective of your project under Section B context. I'll now show you how to complete this section to make sure the budget section of the application form completes correctly. Firstly, you will need to include a title, a description of the intellectual output, as well as details of the prep work and methodology for the intellectual output. We recommend you include details here of the type of staff and days required to complete these outcomes to prevent potential overlap with manager and administrative staff costs, which normally should be covered under project management and implementation. In addition, if you need to use any subcontractors or to purchase specialist equipment to produce the intellectual output, you will need to make it clear in this section and claim it under the exceptional cost budget heading. To demonstrate that intellectual outputs are substantial, it may be helpful to explain how you have calculated the resources needed for each intellectual output. You'll also need to indicate when you will start and end working on the intellectual output, as well as show which languages the intellectual output will be available in, what type of media it is, and which organizations will be working on it. You have up to 5,000 characters in each text box, so please make use of them. I'll now talk you through the information I'm going to input in the form. The fields for output title, description, type of output. We need to use a drop-down menu for this type. Tasks and methodology are mandatory, so I am just writing test in here for the purpose of this demonstration. I'm now going to select the output type from the drop-down menu. Now I will select the start and end date. It is important to mention here that we recommend you use the calendar function to input the date in the correct format, the date, the month, and the year. Otherwise, the form will not validate. I will choose the year 2018, the month November, and the date, the 11th for the start date. I will now move to the end date and I will select the year 2019, the month July, and the date 20th for the end date. I will now choose the languages the intellectual output will be produced in and the format. I will click the plus symbol twice for languages and I will choose two options. So I select my first option as English and I will now select the second option as Finnish. You can also select a type of media from the drop-down menu in which your output will be produced like this. by clicking on the plus symbol and selecting from the drop-down menu. I will then select which organization will lead the production of the intellectual output and any other organizations in the partnership that will work on it. I will select the organization using the drop-down menu. I will select my organization for the lead organization, and then I will click on the plus symbol twice to add my participating organizations. So now I will select my participating organizations, as you can see on screen. If you make a mistake, you can remove the last option in the list, as you will see now, by clicking the minus symbol. I will click the minus symbol under the Languages section of the form to demonstrate this. You can add as many intellectual outputs as you require. I'm going to demonstrate this by adding a second intellectual output by selecting the Add Output button. Now I'm going to type in Test 2 under the output title and output description. I will select the output type from the drop-down menu, which I am showing on screen now, and again I will type Test 2 within the Describe task box and fill in the relevant details again. For the start date, I will select the year 2019. I will select the month June and the date 30th. And for the end date, sorry, I'm going to go back to the start date and demonstrate how to do that again. So I'll go back to the start date. I will select the year 2019. I will select the month April. And I will select the 1st of April for the start date. And for the end date, I will use a drop-down menu again. I will select the year 2019, the month June, and the date 30th for the end date. I will scroll down now and I will select languages and I will choose one option. So once again, clicking on the add symbol and selecting an option for language. I will then click on the add symbol under media once and I will choose an option for the media. I will then move to the activity leading organization and I will select the Portuguese Test 2 organization in the drop-down menu for the lead. I will then click on the plus symbol twice for participating organizations and I will select the other two organizations, Testi Chemo and my organization. I will now scroll down to section G.2 Multiplier Events. Multiplier events are only applicable if you plan to deliver intellectual outputs, and they must be national or transnational events aimed specifically at disseminating intellectual outputs. So if there are no intellectual outputs, there can be no multiplier events, and this question will not appear in the application form. Examples of multiplier events are national or transnational conferences, seminars and events. Training courses, webinars, piloting sessions and meetings are not considered eligible as multiplier events. Multiplier events are also expected to be a physical event. A very important point here is that multiplier events cannot take place before an intellectual output has been substantially developed. The main purpose of multiplier events is to disseminate one or more intellectual outputs produced by the project. Therefore, in order to maximize the dissemination potential, the intellectual outputs in question should normally be available to showcase at such events. Multiplier events must take place in an eligible location. This will normally be one of the countries of the partners participating in the project. Where justified in the application, they can also take place in the country of the seat of an institution of the EU, Brussels, Frankfurt, Luxembourg, Strasbourg, and The Hague, or in the country of an associated partner. I will now pause for a minute just to have a glass of water. Only participants from organizations other than the beneficiary organizations can be counted in the number of individuals for the purpose of determining the grant amount. These participants can be local, i.e. from the country where the event is taking place, or international, i.e. from other countries. So, international participants will be travelling from other countries to attend the event, whereas local participants will be living in the country where the event takes place. Whether a participant is considered as local or international does not depend on their nationality, but on where they are travelling from. If you're planning to include multiplier events, choose Yes from the drop-down menu to generate the multiplier events section of the application form. So here I will select Yes from the drop-down menu. I'll now talk you through the information that I will input for the multiplier event. Similar to intellectual outputs, you'll need to include a title and description for any multiplier events. I am now going to input test for demonstration purposes. I will type test in event title and test in event description. I will then select the country the event is taking place in and which intellectual outputs will be disseminated. I will select United Kingdom for the country the event is taking place in. And I will also choose for the UK to be the lead organisation by selecting My Organisation from the drop-down list. For the dates, please remember that a multiplier event should take place after an intellectual output has been developed. As I mentioned previously, all multiplier events must be linked to intellectual outputs, so I will focus on the first intellectual output. I will now move on to the start date, and I will choose the year 2019. I will choose the month August and the 8th of August for the start date, and then I will move on to selecting the end date. For the end date, I will choose the year of 2019, the month October, and the date the 10th as the end date. I will then choose test 1 for the intellectual output. You also need to select which organizations are participating in the event. I will select one organization as the lead and the other organization as a participating organization. I will use the drop-down menu to select the lead organization, and then I will click on the plus symbol twice for participating organizations, and I will select the other two organizations. You can add as many multiplier events as you need, but the funding is limited to a maximum of €30,000 per project. Now I will talk you through how to add a second multiplier event and how to complete the relevant boxes on the form. I will click on the Add Event button and I will type in Test 2 in event title and event description, which I am now going to do on screen. I will select Finland for the country of venue. Once I've selected Finland, I'll move to the start date and I will select the year 2019, the month August, and the date 26 as the start date. And then I'll move to the end date and select the year 2019, the month November, and the day the 26th as the end date. I will then choose test 2 for the intellectual output, and I will then move on to selecting the second organization in the drop-down menu for the lead organization. I will then click on the plus symbol twice for participating organization and select the other two organizations. I will then scroll down and I will move to section G.3 of the application form. Learning, teaching and training activities can be included if they are clearly linked to the project objectives. For example, you could use this type of activity to support the piloting of your intellectual outputs with the appropriate target group, if appropriate. The program guide lists the eligible activity types and duration. Please see page 114. If you include learning, teaching and training activities, you should clearly explain how they will support the achievement of your project objectives and whether you plan to use any EU tools such as Europass, ECVET, IPALE, or any national instruments to validate the learning outcomes of the participants. We would strongly encourage you to consider using ECVET if your application is for a VET field, which will in turn strengthen your application in respect to the quality of the tools for validating participants' learning outcomes. If your application is in an adult education field, you may want to consult the website of the Electronic Platform for Adult Learning in Europe, IPALE. Europass is another useful tool for recognizing learning in both VET and adult education projects. If you're planning to include learning, teaching, and training activities, please select Yes from the drop-down menu to generate and complete this part of the application form. I will select Yes, and then I will type in Test in the 3 text boxes. So I will type in Test in the text box before and the text boxes after the C1 activity box. You will need to choose the appropriate field and activity type and provide a detailed description. If your project is, for example, focused on adult education, then we would expect to see activities only in the field of adult education. I will now talk you through the information for the learning, teaching and training activity. I will choose adult education as the field and blended mobility of adult education learners as the activity type. I will then type test in the description box, and I will input 8 participants, 2 special needs, and 2 accompanying persons. I will then insert 30 days, and I will just scroll back up and select UK as a country of venue. As a reminder, the program guide contains information about the different types of activities that are possible for each field. When you input the number of participants, this is the total number for this activity, which includes participants with special needs and any accompanying persons. You will need to input the duration in either days or months, which depends on the activity type you have selected. Since I have chosen an activity that can only have a short duration, the box for months is grayed out and cannot be typed in. To demonstrate how this changes, I will now change the activity to one which allows long-term durations. I will start by removing 30 days. I will then scroll up and change the activity type to long-term teaching or training assignments. I will then input 2 months duration, and I will click this plus symbol twice for participating organizations, and I will choose all organizations. So here I'm just selecting the organizations that will be participating. You will now be able to see that the duration in days is grayed out and cannot be typed in. Just like with intellectual outputs and multiplier events, you can add as many learning, teaching and training activities that you need with the Add Activity button. Please be aware that learning, teaching and training activities should include participants from beneficiary organizations from at least 2 different countries. Please make sure that you answer questions within this section, which will appear once you have selected Yes for the learning, teaching and training activities. With regards to the long-term activities, please be aware that as they are activities which duration is based on months and not days, it is not possible to request additional days for travelling within the application form, and possible additional days can be covered under the Project Management and Implementation Budget heading. I will now scroll down to section H. This section focuses on 3 areas: impact, dissemination, and sustainability. Please remember that impact is a very important element in Erasmus Plus projects, and you must therefore show the importance of your proposal on your target groups and beyond, as well as on a local, regional, national, and European level. Think about the added value of realizing this project on a European level rather than with national partners, and explain this here. Plan for dissemination activities to take part throughout your project lifetime and not just at the end. Have a look at Annex 2 of the program guide, which provides practical guidance on dissemination of your project. Demonstrate that dissemination will reach and engage all of your partners, stakeholders, and wider network. And finally, make sure it is clear that your plans for sharing the results of your project do not contain disproportionate limitations to free access. If you do intend to introduce any limitations, you will need to explain and justify this here, bearing in mind the program requirements for open access. I will now scroll down to section I, Budget. You will find more detailed guidance on how to complete the budget section in our guides for applicants and in Part B of the program guide. Getting the budget right is important as it can not only affect the funding you may receive for your project, but also the quality assessment of your application. It is important to ensure that your budget is proportionate to your project and in line with the program budget rules. The maximum total grant available for any strategic partnership in the fields of vet and adult education equates to €12,500 per month multiplied by the project duration in months. However, not all projects will receive the maximum grant. The budget for strategic partnerships is intended to be a contribution to the costs of delivering the project and may not cover all costs. The budget is made up of a number of different budget items, some of which are calculated on a unit cost basis, and some of which are calculated on the basis of estimated actual costs. Some budget items, such as intellectual outputs and multiplier events, are only applicable for supporting innovation projects. Other budget items, such as exceptional costs and transnational teaching, training, and learning activities, may be applicable for any type of project, but must be strongly justified within the application form in order to be approved. You must refer to the detailed budget guidance on pages 118 to 127 of the 2018 Programme Guide. This guidance outlines definitions of what is considered eligible for funding under each budget heading and any conditions that apply, in addition to explaining how the budget item is calculated. It is very important to ensure that the funding you request for your project is eligible and well justified within the application. Ineligible or unjustified budget items may not be approved. You should design your project budget around the activities and outputs you need to deliver in order to achieve the planned project objectives. Moving on to section I.1. This component of the grant is a contribution to general project management and smaller scale project implementation activities such as project management, planning, managing finances, coordination, communication between the partners are examples of this. Smaller scale learning, teaching and training materials, tools and approaches, virtual cooperation and local project activities, for example, classroom project work with learners, work activities, organization and mentoring of embedded learning or training activities, and smaller scale information, promotion and dissemination activities, for example, brochures, leaflets and websites. The amount payable is based on the duration of the strategic partnership and the number of partners involved. As you can see, this section of the budget is automatically completed based on the number of organizations that were included in section D at the beginning of the application form. I will now move on to section I.2. This component of the grant is a contribution to travel and subsistence costs for meetings hosted by the participating organizations. You will need to click the Add button to create a line for each meeting. Costs are based on 3 distance bands. You will need to use the distance calculator to fill this out. A link to this is provided in the guidance for applicants. The distance should be calculated from the nearest town or city to where you or your partner organization is normally based, i.e. the registered address. Once you put the locations into the distance calculator, it will show the distance band applicable, which you will need to input into the application form to calculate the unit cost. The band that comes up is the band which you will need to input into the application form. This will then automatically populate with the unit cost. The unit cost is a contribution to the cost of a return journey. Please ensure that you input the correct distance bands to avoid confusion with your budget. To avoid confusion and issues with your budget, I'm now going to input the information about the partner meetings that each organization will attend. I will start by clicking on the add symbol 5 times to add 5 rows. For the first row, I will choose My Organisation and Testi Chemo for the second and third. I will then select Portuguese Test Organisation 2 for the last two. Following this, I will input 4 participants in the first row, 4 participants in the second row, and two participants in each of the remaining rows. Just to correct, that was 4 participants in the first row and 2 participants in the remaining rows. You should bear in mind that if you are having 5 partner meetings hosted by each partner, you will need to complete this section with 4 partner meetings rather than 5, as each partner will host 1 meeting and attend 4 meetings. This sounds obvious, but it is a common error. So in this example, there are a total of 3 meetings planned, with each partner hosting 1 each. Now I'm going to switch to the distance calculator to work out the correct distance band. So I will open the distance calculator, which you will be able to see on screen shortly. Due to some technical issues, I will just pause for a moment. Thank you. So the distance calculator, which you can now see on screen, works by you inputting the town or city that will be the point of departure and arrival for the partner meeting. Our test organisations are based in Birmingham, Helsinki and Algarve. Now I will begin by inputting the name of the location. I will input Birmingham and Helsinki as the from and to locations. So here I'm typing in Birmingham and Helsinki as the to location. The calculator will give the distance automatically, as you can see on screen. I will then input Algarve as the to location, which I will type in now. And once again, you can see that the correct distance will appear. As you can see, the distance calculator will offer suggestions as I type. It provides the distance in kilometers, and it is this number which dictates the distance band you will need to select. As you can see, the distance from Birmingham to Helsinki and from Birmingham to Algarve will fall into the same distance band, so I will now switch back to the application form to input this information. So I will select the distance band as 100 to 1999 kilometers for the first, second and fourth row. It is clear from the distance band calculator that the UK organisation will attend 2 meetings within the same distance band, so both of those meetings can be included in one row. I will now go back to the distance calculator to check the distance between the Finnish and the Portuguese organisation. So I'll just open up the distance calculator and I will now input Helsinki as a from location. And as you can see, the distance appears straight away. I will now switch back to the application form and input over 2,000 kilometers as a distance band for the third and the fifth row. As you can see, the distance between Helsinki and Algarve will qualify for a different distance band. After inputting the information about the organizations, participants and the distance band, the amounts per participant and in total will automatically populate. I will now move on to section I.3. The funding under this heading can only be used as a contribution to costs directly related to developing the intellectual outputs, and this must be clearly justified in the body of the application. Staff costs for managers and administrative staff are normally expected to be funded using the project management and implementation grant unless clearly justified. In order to justify requesting manager or administrator days, you must clearly explain how the requested days will be used specifically for the development of the intellectual outputs rather than for general project management or administration. You must explain what any manager or admin time will be used for in relation to the development of the intellectual outputs and why these tasks could not be co-financed using the project management and implementation budget. You should also justify the number of days requested and ensure that this is proportionate. If not sufficiently justified, the requested days may not be approved. I will now add the budget information for the two intellectual outputs that we created earlier in the application form. As mentioned previously, the information you add in the budget should be clearly reflected in the earlier section. I will now add 5 rows using the plus symbol. Selecting 5 rows as you can see on screen. And I will use 3 rows for my organization. So I'll select my organization for the first 3 rows, and the last 2 rows will be for Testi Chemo. You should use a new row for any change in the organization, intellectual output, staff category, or number of days to ensure the budget completes correctly. Now I will include a small number of manager days for intellectual output 1. Please bear in mind, if you do include any manager or administrative days, you must clearly justify them. Towards the end of the application, I will show you where the justifications should be inserted. For my organization, I will input as follows. Intellectual output 1. I will select manager as a staff category and 5 days. I will select intellectual output 1 again, the teachers, trainers, researchers category, and 30 days. I will then select intellectual output 2, the teachers, trainers, and researchers category, and 30 days. As I complete each row, you can see that the budget is automatically filled in. For Testi Chemo, I will input as follows. So I will select intellectual output 1, the managers category, and 30 days. I will then select intellectual output 2, the teachers, trainers, and researchers category, and 30 days. I will then click anywhere on the form to enable this to calculate, which you can now see on screen. The cost generated by the category of staff and number of days should be clearly linked to the description of the intellectual outputs in section G above. I'll now scroll down to section I.4. This budget heading is only applicable to projects planning to organize national and/or transnational events aimed at disseminating intellectual outputs produced by the project. Therefore, a project which does not plan to deliver intellectual outputs cannot be awarded funding under this budget heading. Please be aware that the cost for travel and subsistence of the representatives of the participating organizations are not included in this. Important to note as well is that only participants from organizations other than the beneficiary organizations can be counted in the number of individuals for the purposes of determining the grant amount. These participants can be local, meaning from the country where the event is taking place, or international, so from other countries. The cost should be clearly linked to the description of the multiplier event in section G above, and, as mentioned earlier on, multiplier events should not take place before intellectual outputs they refer to have been developed. The costs are calculated on a unit cost basis up to a maximum of €30,000 per project. I will now add the budget information for the two multiplier events. Once again, it is important to use a different row based on the information that you're entering. For multiplier events, you should use a different row for any change in the organization and the multiplier event. You do not need to use a different row for local and international participants as long as the organization and multiplier event are the same. I will add one row for my organization, which I will show on screen now. So for my organization, I will input as follows: E1, 100 local participants, and 0 international participants. I will then add two rows for chemo using the add icon. I will input testy chemo as the pick of the organization, and then I will select for the first E1, 0 local participants, and 10 international participants. I will then select E2 for the row below, and I will input 150 local participants and 0 international participants. I will then click anywhere on the form to enable this to calculate, which you should be able to see on screen. Please note that the compulsory fields always have to be completed in order for the form to calculate and function properly. Therefore, where there are no participants attending events, you should make sure that 0 is inserted, since chemo will be including participants in both multiplier events. This is also why chemo has international participants for E1, since this multiplier event will be based in the UK and their participants will be from Finland. I will now move to section I.5. Funding should only be requested under this budget heading where your project intends to deliver transnational training, teaching, or learning activities within the strategic partnership. The added value of these mobility activities needs to be addressed in the body of the application form. There are a few subheadings under this section. Travel. This is a contribution to the travel costs of participants, including accompanying persons from their place of origin to the venue of their activity and the return journey. You will also have to use a distance calculator for this, but the form uses different rates when you enter the distance. I will now input travel information using a row for the participants from each organization. Please note when you are completing your application form, you will need to use the distance calculator again to check which distance band to use. So I will add two rows using the plus symbol. I will then select my organization for the first row and testy chemo for the second. For both rows, I will input C1 as the activity number, and I will select 4 participants, and the distance I will select is up to 1999 kilometers. For the second row, I will do the same, so I'll select C1 as the activity. There will be the same distance band that I will select, and also 4 participants. Here I have ensured that the number of participants included matches the total number of participants included earlier in the form. This is very important because any inconsistencies here would either affect your grant requested or even prevent the form from validating. Learning, teaching, training activities. The duration of both types of activities should exclude travel days. However, if participants will be traveling a long distance for the activity, it is possible to request individual support for up to 2 travel days, one on either side of the activity for short-term activities, i.e. blended mobility of learners and joint staff training events. If applicable, an extra 2 days can be added to the duration of the activity in the budget section, along with a clear explanation to justify the reasons behind doing so in the description box. Extra travel days cannot be added for long-term activities. Moving on to individual support. Here the contribution for participants partaking in any long-term or short-term learning, teaching and training activities will be calculated depending on the duration of the activity. Accompanying persons should be listed separately on the right-hand side. Since the activity we chose earlier was for a long-term duration, I will complete the long-term section. The form will not allow you to add a short-term activity under the long-term section. For long-term mobility, I will add 2 rows using the plus symbol. One will be for my organization, and 1 row will be for Testi Chemo. For my organization, I will input as follows. The activity will be C1, the country, Finland. Duration will be 2 months, 3 participants, 2 months, and 1 accompanying person. For Testi Chemo, I will input the same activity, C1. I will select United Kingdom as a country of destination, 2 months, 3 participants, 2 months, and 1 accompanying person. I will then click anywhere on the application form to calculate. If you're trying to complete the long-term section and no learning, teaching and training activities are available for you to choose, you should check the earlier section of the form to make sure that you have selected the correct activity and input the correct duration in the correct box. Once again, I have made sure that the number of participants and accompanying persons matches the information in the earlier section of the form. Linguistic support. This is a contribution to costs associated with language support for the long-term activities. Therefore, in order to qualify for the linguistic support, your activity should have a minimum duration of 2 months. Linguistic support can be offered to participants to improve their knowledge of the language of the host country in order to support their active participation. Any costs requested under this budget heading must be clearly justified within the body of the application. The application won't allow you to request linguistic support if you do not have a learning, teaching and training activity that meets the minimum duration. If you need to add linguistic support but the form will not let you, you should check section D where you input all the learning, teaching and training activity details. Exceptional costs for expensive travel. This heading will only apply in exceptional cases where the normal unit cost calculated by using the distance calculator will not cover at least 70% of the expected travel costs for duly justified reasons. Examples might include where participants need to travel from very remote or distant areas, far from transport hubs. Any request for exceptional costs will need to be clearly justified, including evidence of the expected costs in order to be approved. Where such costs are justified, you can request up to 80% of the expected eligible costs. It is important to note here that the number of participants here need to match the numbers put into the descriptive part in section G. If this is not the case, the form will not validate, so please double check this. Please bear in mind that participants in teaching, training and learning activities must have a link with the organisations participating as funded partners in the project. For example, they should be staff or learners of the participating organisations. Please refer to the eligibility criteria on page 114 of the programme guide for more information. Moving on to section I.6. This budget heading is only applicable if you plan to involve participants with special needs in your project, resulting in additional costs. This component of the grant is based on an estimate of the likely actual costs relating specifically to the needs of participants with disabilities. In the budget section, you will need to identify the activities that the requested costs relate to. The participation of individuals with special needs must also be justified in the main body of the application form. You can claim up to 100% of these real costs. As a reminder, a person with special needs is defined under Erasmus Plus as a potential participant whose physical, mental or health-related situation is such that his or her participation in the project would not be possible without extra financial support. Moving on to section I.7. This budget heading relates exclusively to costs related to subcontracting or the purchase of goods or services that cannot be delivered or provided by the organisations participating in the project for duly justified reasons. Any costs requested under this heading must be clearly justified within the application. Where such costs are justified, you can request up to 75% of the expected costs, up to a maximum total of €50,000 per project. For example, if you expect the total cost for subcontracting external evaluation of the project will be €1,000, you can request up to 75% of this, i.e. €750. Visa costs are not considered eligible as exceptional costs under Key Action 2. Any visa costs will need to be co-financed using the project management and implementation budget. In respect to the special needs support and exceptional cost description, the application form allows you to write up to 5,000 characters, so please ensure that any requests under these budget headings are clearly described and justified in the application form. Moving on to Section J. This summary will be used by the European Commission and the national agency in their publications and will also feed into the Erasmus Plus project results platform, so it should be written with this in mind. It should be written in clear, plain English, avoiding any technical or sector-specific jargon to ensure that it can be understood by the general public. Scrolling down. Please check that the information is completely correct. If not, you will need to make amendments in the earlier sections. I will now scroll down to Section N, Annexes. The compulsory annexes which you need to attach to your application before submitting are as follows. The signed declaration of honour, the scanned mandates of each participating organisation to the applicant, signed by both parties, and a completed timetable of activities, also called the project timetable spreadsheet. If you fail to attach any of these documents, unfortunately, your project application will be ineligible. These documents can be downloaded from the Apply for Vocational Education and Training or Adult Education Partnership Funding pages of the Erasmus Plus website. All documents requiring signatures must be signed in original and then scanned and attached to the application. Electronic signatures should not be used. I'll now switch to a completed timetable, which you will now be able to see on screen. The timetable uses the same letters that appear in the application for intellectual outputs, multiplier events, and learning, teaching, and training activities. Some activities don't have a letter in the application, but these are explained in the box underneath the table. It's a good idea to use these letters throughout your application when covering any project management and implementation activities like Skype meetings, local project activities, dissemination activities, etc. As you can see, we've colored the cells to show which month each activity takes place in. This must correspond to the information that you include in your application form. You should ensure that the project activity is planned for the whole project duration. I will now switch back to the application form, which you'll now be able to see on screen. If there is still some room once you have attached the compulsory attachments, you can attach other relevant annexes such as the needs analysis and a sample work program. A tip here is to keep it concise. We expect all the information that is key to the quality and content of your project to be included within the main body of the application form. Now, before we continue to look at submission, I just want you to see what happens if you select exchanges of practices as a main objective of your project. I'll bring up Section B, Context, and I will now change the main objective of the project from innovation to exchange of practices. I will then scroll down to Section G of the application form, so I'm back to Section G of the application form. Up until Section G, Project Management, the e-form looks the same as how we have filled it in. As you can see, the sections for intellectual outputs and multiplier events are not available now, and the application form goes straight onto learning, teaching, and training activities, and the numbering is therefore slightly different. I will now scroll down to Section I, Budget. Here, in the budget section, the sections on intellectual outputs and multiplier events also do not appear. This is normal and correct, as intellectual outputs and multiplier events are not available for exchange of practices projects. As I mentioned earlier, some of the expenditure requested will have to be justified, and this is the box which should be used for your justification. I will now bring up this particular section for your reference. Just scrolling down to find the relevant section. As you can see on screen, this will be the section where you will need to provide additional information, and this is a section which will be used for your justification. This is mainly applied to managers and administrative days requested under the intellectual outputs and exceptional cost budget headings. I will now move on to section O, submission. Just scrolling down to section O. Finally, here are a few hints and tips on the application submission procedure. Validate as you go through and also after completing the whole application. I'll now click on Validate to demonstrate this. You'll be taken to any sections that are incorrect or sections that have been missed, such as this particular section. These particular sections will need to be resolved before you can submit the form. Ask someone else to proofread your final application before submission to ensure it is clear and covers everything. Ensure all the required annexes are attached and have been signed where necessary. Remember to refer to section K, the checklist, and read the data protection notice carefully. Also, save the final completed version of your application form to your PC in case of any submission issues. Ensure that you are connected to the internet before you try to submit the application. Remember that the deadline mentioned in the form is Brussels time. As there is a time difference, the form must be submitted online by 11 a.m. UK time on Wednesday, the 21st of March 2018. Complete and submit your application in good time before the deadline in case of any unexpected technical difficulties. Please do not leave it till the last minute. If your application has been submitted successfully, section 0.4 Submission Summary will update to show the status as OK. I will now move back to the presentation. I will bring up on screen. Okay. Okay, now we will go through the application requirements. Before we finish off this webinar, I'd like to recap on some of the requirements and key points you need to be aware of. Once we have received your application, we will check its eligibility. You must ensure your application meets the eligibility requirements and that you attach all the required annexes to your application and submit it by the deadline. Unfortunately, if you do not meet the eligibility requirements, your application will be made ineligible and will not go forward to assessment. Please make sure you read the program guide and the National Agency guidance for applicants carefully and are clear about the requirements before submitting your application. Your organisation and all your partners will need to be validated by the national agency of the country where they are based in order to take part in the project. Validation is a separate process which runs in parallel to the application assessment process. Although your organisation must be validated in order to be funded, your organisation being validated does not automatically imply a successful outcome for your application. During the validation process, we will check whether all the required information you put into the participant portal is complete and correct. We will check whether the required legal and financial forms have been uploaded, along with the required supporting documents. Please refer to the guidance for applicants for further guidance on which supporting documents you need to upload to support the validation process. These will vary slightly depending on your organisation type and the value of your grant requested. Organizations that are not validated will not be able to take part in Erasmus Plus funded projects. You should therefore ensure that both your organization and all your partners have correctly uploaded the relevant documents and updated the participant portal in good time. Delays can impact on the assessment and contracting processes and may ultimately result in any offer of funding being withdrawn. Just to recap on some of the key points in relation to the Strategic Partnerships budget. The maximum budget is a variable amount defined by multiplying €12,500 per month for the duration of the project, with the absolute maximum being €450,000 for a 36-month project. However, not all projects will request or receive the maximum available budget. You must design your budget around the objectives, activities, and results of your project, ensuring that you comply with the budget rules. The grant is intended as a contribution to the costs of delivering the project and may not cover all costs. Most budget items are calculated based on unit costs. For example, this can be the number of participants for a certain duration or a set cost per distance travelled. Budget headings based on unit costs are project management and implementation, transnational project meetings, intellectual outputs, and multiplier events. Under learning, teaching and training activities, travel, individual support, and linguistic support are also based on unit costs. Some budget items are based on an estimate of the likely real costs. These are special needs support and exceptional costs, as well as exceptional costs for expensive travel costs under learning, teaching and training activities. These budget headings require detailed justification within your application form, and you are entitled to claim a percentage of the estimated likely costs depending on the budget heading. You should refer to Part B of the Programme Guide and the Guidance for Applicants for detailed guidance on the rules and requirements for each budget item. Your budget should be proportionate to your planned activities and demonstrate reasonable value for money. Organisations must ensure that Erasmus Plus funding is used to deliver the activities that are set out in their application. If you or any of your partners are receiving other funding from other sources to deliver similar activities, including from other EU funding programmes, you must disclose this in the relevant section of the application form, and you must ensure that there is no overlap or risk of double funding. Each project is only entitled to receive one grant. Identical or very similar applications submitted either by the same applicant or partners or by a different applicant or partners will be subject to a specific assessment and may all be rejected. As a reminder, the following documents must be annexed to the application form. The Declaration of Honour, signed by the legal representative mentioned in the application form. The mandates of each partner to the applicant, signed by both parties, and with information identical to the information about the partners in the application form, and the project timetable. We recommend that you scan different documents together into a single file. If, after checking that the annexes are within the size and file format limits, you're still experiencing problems with attaching annexes, you can email them to erasmusplus@ecoris.com, clearly stating which application form they relate to by providing the application hash code and your organization's details as well as the project name. But please only do this as an exception and ensure you have followed all the available guidance first. You must ensure that you have validated all sections of the application before completing. You will need to ensure that you are connected to the internet in order to submit your completed application. You should also ensure that all sections of the form are valid and all annexes are attached before completing the form. If there are any technical issues preventing the form from being submitted, it will say error under status. If this happens and you are unable to submit the form, you should follow the alternative submission procedure as described in the Guide for Applicants. In this case, you can still submit your application by sending it via email to us within the 2 hours following the official deadline. However, the UK National Agency will only accept alternative submission if the error message is recorded under status in the submission summary section of the e-form with a timestamp prior to or on the deadline date and time. The following error messages are not accepted as technical issues. The first, ERR-01, as this error relates to invalid data or missing fields in the e-form. This is not considered to be a technical issue and can be rectified by correcting the application form and validating it again. The second is ERR-06. As this error means that there are errors with the annexes, meaning that the total size of the attachments exceeds 10 megabytes, or they are not in the accepted file format specified in section N of the application form. This can be rectified either by reducing the size of the attachments or by removing them. Third, unknown. This error means that the e-form was not submitted and no submission attempts were made. The fourth is local-01. In order to submit the e-form, you must click the appropriate options in the yellow security warning bar at the top of the form. The final error code is local-02. In order to submit the e-form, you should check your internet connection and try to submit the form again, or try a different network connection. This slide just shows an overview of the application process. Beginning with the e-form, the deadline for the submission of all applications is Wednesday, the 21st of March 2018 at 11 a.m. UK time. The key documents that need to be uploaded to the participant portal to support validation include the legal entity form, LEF, financial identification form, FIF, and recent account information to demonstrate financial activity. Read the guide for applicants for further information. A reminder to familiarize yourself with the budget rules and ensure that your budget request is compliant and proportionate to your project. Remember that not all projects will receive the maximum possible grant. And finally, a reminder of the annexes you will need to attach to the application: the Declaration of Honour, signed by the legal representative, mandates for each partner, and a timetable of activities. If you are considering reapplying in 2018, please bear in mind the following. Don't resubmit exactly the same application form from a previous core year without making any changes. Do make sure that you take on board the feedback from the assessors and any budget assessment comments and address them. Bear in mind that there have been some changes to key documents, including the program guide and guide for experts for 2018. Ensure that you refer to the up-to-date 2018 core documents and update your application accordingly. There have also been changes to action priorities, the award criteria, and some small changes to the budget. Also, ensure you attach the correct, up-to-date versions of annexes. Also bear in mind that the application assessment process is competitive and only the highest scoring applications may be funded. Each year, the number of applications received varies, so no two rounds are the same. The best way to ensure success is to submit a high-quality application. A few final hints and tips before we conclude. Ensure you carefully read all the up-to-date European Commission documents for the 2018 call, as well as the national agency's 2018 core guidance for applicants. Please save the form frequently so no information is lost. Ensure the budget you request is accurate, in line with the budget rules, and well justified. Keep answers clear and concise. Make sure that all questions are answered. Don't assume that anything is obvious, and make good use of the 5,000 character limits in the text boxes. Make sure you refer to the award criteria, which your application will be assessed against as you complete the application. It is a good idea to get someone else to proofread your application before submitting to make sure it is clear and coherent. And finally, please leave plenty of time for completing and submitting your application form before the deadline of the 21st of March 2018 at 11 a.m. UK time. To conclude, I would like to remind you of the support the UK National Agency will be offering in the run-up to the deadline on the 21st of March, in addition to webinars. A live Q&A webinar will be taking place on the 19th of February. You can register via the Erasmus Plus website, but please bear in mind that places are limited. A detailed guide for applicants on how to complete the application form is available on our website. There are separate guides for KA2 Vet and Adult Education. Please read them carefully as they are designed to help you submit a good quality application. If you haven't already done so, please sign up to our newsletter to keep up with key information about the call and other developments in Erasmus+. On our website, you can find all the call documents, guides for applicants, and other key documents such as the mandate and project timetable spreadsheet or timetable of activities templates. We also have a helpline where our team is available to answer your questions about your Key Action 2 vet or adult education. We are here to help. Finally, thank you all for listening to our pre-recorded webinar. If you have any further questions, please contact us via the email address or the number on this screen. The team is available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, to help you with any queries. We wish you all the best with your application. Thank you for listening.